mi hanno detto che comando io, quindi buongiorno a tutti e benvenuti a questa giornata.
Good
Io
morning,
vorrei
everybody,
cominciare.
and welcome. I'd like to start with a single word that is slightly different nuances in Italian and English, and this is heritage. In Italian, the word eredità is used in families, when you hand over something to next generations, whereas in English, the word heritage means really cultural heritage. And today we are here to discuss about a heritage that involves a double value, something that has been handed over by Paganini to its city, his violin in the Cannone, and something that becomes the heritage and the property of everybody, people from Genoa and people from all over the world. There are 2 points to be considered in this respect. This heritage is shared. It's not handed over to someone from his family, but to his city. And this is quite unusual. Geniuses of the past did not choose to hand over their property to the state, to public bodies. And this is the first point. And the second point is that those who receive that kind of heritage will take on several responsibilities. Sometimes we know, for instance, that if we receive something from our parents and so on, we do not want that kind of property. We do not want to take on the responsibility and the liability associated with it. But as soon as we accept it, and therefore that asset becomes something we own, becomes our property, then we need to make sure that that asset is protected. Something extraordinary like this violin is a shared asset of the community as a whole. And here, today, this is what we are going to do. We have an asset which is part of our heritage, and this requires a kind of work that involves science, culture, responsibility. This involves excellence. This involves public institutions. This involves scientists who, day by day, within their profession, work in order to define the conditions in order for this heritage to be truly shared. So, once again, we will have the chance to listen to the music played on this violin, and this is something we received from Paganini. He considered this city a sort of member of his family. So we will play the violin again, but before that, let's discuss about what it means to have this violin as a future generation. How can we protect it? How can we protect it in order to hand it over to future generations? We have here 3 maestros, Calso, Montano, and Montanari, who over the years have always protected this violin. We have here the curators of the other museums in Strada Nuova in Genoa, and all of them have teamed up in order to really pursue and to really meet the obligations that are associated with this kind of heritage. Perhaps we say we should give more people the chance to play with this violin. We should give more authorizations. I'm not that sure. I don't fully agree with that. This is a unique object. So let's give a round of applause to the curators and custodians of the violin. And I'd like also to thank those who have worked and enhanced this knowledge from a scientific point of view. New technology is now being applied to these instruments, and we now can see what's inside those instruments. The Institute in Grenoble, the International Research and Restoration Institute involved in the work that has been done on this violin and on other violins. This is what we are doing to know these assets even better. These assets made us be transported from what the geniuses have done with them to a sort of shared knowledge. These days are quite hectic. We are working a lot, and we are working on new proposals. We are working on the very special history of this violin, and we want to convey a very special message. This man, this extraordinary violinista is also someone who gives us the tools and instruments to tell the story of our city. Instead of sharing his works with the people, we would like to have people come here and listen to the music played throughout this competition. And we would like people to come to Genoa, to get to know Genoa. And by the way, Paganini ended his career with a wonderful European career and did not forget his city when he decided to leave, to bequeath his violin to the city and to the community. So I'd like to thank all those who have worked to organize this day of research. And it's a truly international event gathering experts and institutions from all over the world. And I now give the floor to Mr. Panebianco, who has been the real director of this event.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning everybody. I'd like to thank the City Councillor Giacomo Montanari, who focused his speech on the word heritage, which is a meaningful word. 3 pages, handwritten and closed, sealed, enclosed and put in a sealed envelope. This was the will that was delivered by Paganini to the Senate of Genoa. The universal heir was his son Achille, but his beloved Cannone was bequeathed to the city of Genoa in order for the city to conserve it throughout the centuries. And this is what was written in that will, in Paganini's will, and this is what Montanari has just underlined. We have been working quite a lot to organize this event. I'd like to thank the chairperson, Mr. Apollonia, for his work, and the International Restoration Institute has been the partner of the Paganini Foundation to organize this event. Yesterday, we opened the ceremonies with an event devoted to to the ledger that was bequeathed by Paganini as well to the city of Genoa, and we are still having that book. These are extraordinary objects and are part of the heritage and assets of this city. The Paganini competition is one of the most important violin contests in the world. Genoa is a city of music and also is the hometown to many top science and research institutions. So let's imagine that we can work together through a network of alliances with other organizations and institutions that are represented here today. I'd like to thank the representative of the Grenoble Research Center. He followed all the testing activities on the Cannone, and the results will be presented today for the first time. And also I'd like to thank a number of other members of the association who are here today. There are many people who are following us online, and so I'd like to thank them for being with us. So I really hope our work today will be successful, and at 6:30 this evening we will have the opportunity to attend and to listen to some beautiful quartet music. Thank you.
Bene? Sì, ora sì. Io prendo parola soltanto per fare dei ringraziamenti, perché in un momento come questo
to thank a few people. We are here, this is a gathering of science, history, culture and music. This is a moment which is of paramount importance, and it highlights the importance of heritage, and it's a dialogue between the past and the present. And I can only thank the Councillor Montanari, who here represents the municipality of Genoa. He was the mastermind behind the organization of this event. And in particular, I would like to thank the chairman of the Premio Paganini, Panebianco, Mr. Panebianco. He, a few years ago, he told me about the incredible job that had been done in Grenoble. And we decided to organize this symposium devoted to the Cannone of Paganini and the new research. I believe that we must be forward-looking, and this is of paramount importance. And I would also like to thank all the members of the scientific committee. Over the past year, they've been working hard to put together this event, and thanks to them, it will be possible today to hold this symposium to talk about the new scientific breakthroughs. And I would also like to thank all the speakers, all the keynote speakers. What they do is really important for all of us. And I would also like to thank the city of Genoa. It worked behind the scenes, but they went out of their way to do their best to do that. My heartfelt thanks to Daniela Rullo and others for their excellent work to organize this conference. This being said, I would like to give the floor to Lorenzo. I'm Lorenzo Apollonio. I'm the president of the International Institute for Conservation. And I would first of all like to thank the organization of the Paganini competition and its president. It is rather rare in Italy that people who are in charge of promoting the cultural heritage, namely the immaterial cultural heritage, such as music, is not always taken for granted. And the president of the Premio Paganini decided to take a keen interest in the conservation of historical heritage and cultural heritage. This is rather new in Italy, and what we are trying to aim for today is to focus our attention on the value that the objects, the artifacts we have on hand have. Professor Montanari has told us that the Cannone of Paganini is indeed a masterpiece because it was played by Paganini, but there are other violins on the international stage which are worth conserving and preserving. We need to conserve these instruments, and very often we try to strive to do our utmost to protect these instruments, but what is missing sometimes is the scientific knowledge, and scientific knowledge in this case, in our specific case, in our case in point, is of paramount importance because they have enabled us to better understand the Cannone, how it was made, and how precious it is as an artifact. So we need to make a connection between the material aspect of the conservation of an artifact and the immaterial conservation of it. And when we, on the international scene, when I started talking about immaterial conservation, everybody was rather taken aback, and it raised a few feathers, I must admit. But I must admit that I still enjoy going to concerts, for instance, open-air concerts. And very often we do not understand how difficult it is for these historical instruments to be taken, for instance, up in the mountains for a concert. Some have said that the use of the Cannone has been excessive at times, but as a matter of fact, I believe that based on the scientific instruments and scientific breakthroughs that we have, we will be able to conserve the instruments and at the same time try to make the most out of their musical prowess whenever it is needed. So conservation is indeed our main focus today. Material conservation and immaterial conservation, namely sound and sound performance. So I would like to wish you all the best on your endeavors today. Thank you.
Professor Rossi Rognoni, che modera
Professor
la prima
Rossi
sessione.
Rognoni is kindly invited here at the table. He will be our moderator for the first session. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rossi Rognoni. I would like to thank all the organizers. Today is a very special day. This morning I bumped into a colleague and he was like, wow, what a surprise, such a symposium. Yes, indeed, it is quite a surprise. Why is it so? Because with some of the colleagues I have been working with, we embarked upon this adventure over 15 years ago. So I'm rather ticked off with the organizers because they have clearly hinted at the fact that I'm aging together with the Cannone. It was 15 years ago when a official from the municipality of Genoa, Mr. Certa, decided to set up a working group coordinated by Mr. Fioravanti, who is with us today, to do something which had been unheard of in Italy at the time. Italy had a tradition of scientific studies on musical instruments, for instance, the ones carried out by Vinicio Guy. But at the time, I was a young researcher, and I thought that such an institution was rather frustrating. The studies were scientifically advanced, but they were carried out by people who couldn't be bothered about them. So we were just trying out some tests, but you know, they would be performed on a normal violin, on a mass-produced violin, and not on the artifacts, on the historical violins. So they were just tests to try out some sort of methodologies, but they had no impact whatsoever on the content we wanted to focus on. That is to say, how some musical instruments, especially the historical ones, react to use. So when the municipality of Genoa decided to set up a working group on the Cannone of Paganini, that was a turning point. And the studies carried out by Marco Fioravanti tried to tackle one of the main issues in violin making. That is to say, how violins react to humidity change due to the musician it plays it or to the environment it is played in. And the other basic question for violin making is it true that violins are better when they age? Well, these were the two most important questions that were asked at the time. And over the past 15 years, I worked with this working group, and I must say that I am extremely thankful to the municipality of Genoa for having me involved in this group. Then I moved to London and I lost sight of what was going on here in Genoa. So being here today at this symposium and getting to know the important work that has been carried out by Mr. Giordano, Mr. Carlson and others is indeed extremely exciting for me. There has been a cooperation with the scientific world. Let's think, for instance, about the Synchrotron research. And this project normally starts on the right track with full of enthusiasm, and then they die out over the years. But in this case, after 15 years, here we are. We are here to talk about this important breakthrough in the science of musical instruments. So we shall be hearing about the studies that have been performed over the years and the cooperation with the ESRF lab in Grenoble. The first speaker on our list is Raffaella Besta. I do not have any biographical notes on her. She has introduced herself as an art historian. So the beauty about musical instruments is that they are at a crossroads of various peculiarities and characteristics. I hope you can hear me, but unfortunately the mic is not working, so we cannot hear her.
Mi sentite adesso?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Sono fuori tema, ma in tema.
Yes, I'm an art historian, and at the same time I'm in charge of the scientific side of the Museum of Genoa. So I'm in charge of the Museum di Strada Nuova and Museum Sant'Agostino. So I deal with other artifacts such as ceramics, paintings, and whatsoever, but also the violin. So I'm extremely happy to give you a warm welcome here in Genoa. I'm afraid the microphone is not working again. Yes, now it is working. I apologize for that. So I would like to warmly welcome here at the municipality of Genoa, Palazzo Tursi, there are three main palaces, Palazzo Rosso, Palazzo Bianco, and Palazzo Tursi. So here I've got a few slides to show you, and it is important to be here today in Palazzo Tursi. The Palazzo Tursi was annexed to Palazzo Bianco and Palazzo Rosso in 2004, and it was precisely in 2004 that the Cannone of Paganini was included into the museum. So we wanted to give pride of place to the violin, to the Cannone. And let's have a look at where we are in Genoa, and maybe you will feel the urge to visit the other three museums. The three museums are different from one another. Palazzo Rosso is a sort of house museum where the charm of a 17th century resident still lives on. It preserves the Brignoli-Scale family's rich art collections and historic furnishings. And it is like a monument to this family. There are frescoes, stuccos, and paintings. Palazzo Bianco in the 17th century was bequeathed to the Countess de Galliera. She wanted to sort out a problem at the time, a tricky problem at the time. So I'm sorry, I still have troubles using this microphone. So Palazzo Bianchi was created in 1892, and in the 18th century there was not a museum gathering all the rich collections of the city. So Palazzo Bianchi, which was bequeathed to the city by the Countess, is turned into the main art gallery, offering a rich and diverse overview of Genoese paintings from the 16th and 18th century, alongside outstanding works from the Flemish, Spanish, and Italian schools. And then in Palazzo Doria Tursi became part and parcel of this museum, of this three-set museum. This microphone is driving me crazy. Every now and then the voice fades away. So in 2004, a new structure of the museum was devised, and we decided to include in this Palazzo Doria Tursi museum tapestries, Genoese ceramics, coins, and also the well-known Cannone by Paganini. So these are just a few of our most important paintings, but there are many more. And if we want, we can have a look at the Madonna by Canova, who is right around the corner. And this is yet again one of the masterpieces of our histories. But now let's go back to the Paganini. So let's have a look at the will, which was personally wrote by Niccolò Paganini. Paganini stated, "I bequeath my violin to the city of Genoa so that it may be preserved forever." And it was only in 1851, but Alberto Giordano will be telling us more about it, the violin came in possession of Palazzo Tursi. But at the time, we did not have any museums. We did not have a place to put the Paganini violin on display. And it was only in 1950 when Palazzo Tursi was finally turned into a museum. The violin was put under a glass case, and at the time it was just the municipality of Genoa housing the violin under this case, and some other tapestries and some other works of art. So all the memorabilia of the city were brought here in order to reinforce the beauty of our city. This is a picture, maybe Andrea will get back to it later on. So the violin is an object which is completely different from all the others. Why is it so? Well, first of all, the violin is a historical instrument. It was the instrument that Paganini played throughout his life, and it has also underwent repairs and also some studies. It is of paramount importance to keep the violin in its original state. The repairs were very few, and they were not invasive. And Cesare Candi's repairs will be brought to the fore during our meeting. And as I mentioned earlier on, in the various collections of the museums of Arte Nuova, Strada Nuova, the violin has a double functions. That of a musical, that of an artifact, a historical artifact, and at the same time a functional function. We also have here some sacred objects which can be regarded as a cultural heritage, the cultural heritage of our city. But of course they cannot be used, they do not play. So it's more or less like the Ark of St. John the Baptist, a masterpiece of the 15th century Ligurian goldsmithing, which cannot be used. It's there on display, but cannot be used. The processional ark of St. John the Baptist is kept in the Museum of the Cathedral. It is used it is brought out of its case just once a year, and with all the risks that entails. So let's get back to 2004. Maybe you do not know that the Paganini's canon is very close to us. It's being conserved in the other room, in the adjacent room. So the violin, as you can see here, was preserved at the beginning in a small angle, in a small corner of the room, and the display has been changed. At first, it was put in the same room with other works of art, the ones that you can see here, and we are going to maybe renovate these rooms and these displays. They also house the guitars used by Paganini. And here we go back to what was being said before. It is extremely important to strike the right balance between conservation and use. The directives or the guidelines are not very clear about, or clear-cut about it. Time and again, it's been very difficult to find a way out or to find a common ground as to the so-called loans. The violin, contrary to other works of art, can be used, and therefore it needs to be preserved even better. So what are the guidelines we have to refer to? In Italy, there is a code of guidelines which harks back to the 2019, and there are certain rules which allow for the works of arts to be used outside the museums. And it dwells upon various rules and regulations which are also performed at European level. And as to, well, these are guidelines concerning the preservation of works of art and the loan of works of art. First of all, it is of paramount importance to preserve the conservation of the work of art. So the work of art should never should never leave the place it is kept. So over the past 50 years, various studies have been performed, and Rossi Rognoni was one of the curators of these museums. And so we need to acquire data, thanks to these working groups, to help us protect and conserve the violin. As you can see, instead of the glass room, the glass case we used in the 50s, we decided to have another case, another glass case, which is in a micro-controlled climate. And it's obvious that the room temperature is extremely important, so is humidity. We live in a town by the seaside, and unfortunately we move from very dry climate to a very humid climate. So we need to preserve the right balance within this room of humidity and dryness. So the violin is kept under micro-controlled conditions. But I would like to wind up my presentation by saying that I really do hope that throughout this symposium we will be able to put together, to think, to ponder upon the various pieces of research that have been carried out. But we should all have or aim at one common aim, that is to say, how to conserve and preserve our marvelous instrument at the best of our possibilities. Thank you very much. Thank you for this marvelous historical overview. The translators are taking a small break because we have a technical problem that has to be sorted out. We'll be back soon. Thank you.
Un trattamento tutto diverso e quindi complimenti per questo impegno. Certamente. Allora, siamo 10 minuti in anticipo, cosa meravigliosa. Vorrei chiedere agli organizzatori, siccome siamo anche in streaming, se preferite che continuiamo e abbiamo più tempo per gli interventi alla fine, o se preferite che troviamo un modo di impegnare questi 10 minuti per mantenere la scaletta per le persone che ci seguono online. Continuiamo direttamente. Ecco, vorrei anche ringraziare i traduttori, perché so che c'è una traduzione simultanea per tutti gli interventi, quindi rammento agli speaker di parlare lentamente, e comunque grazie per questo lavoro che viene sempre fatto dietro le quinte, quindi passa inosservato, ma che è complicato e prezioso. Alberto Giordano, faccio il mio lavoro. Alberto Giordano è, ecco qua, si è occupato del cannone per molti anni, ma ha un curriculum meraviglioso che devo leggere. Si è diplomato alla Scuola Internazionale di Liuteria di Cremona nell'84 e dal 94 ha collaborato alla conservazione del violino di Paganini, del Cannone. Numerosi interventi a conferenze, atti di convegni, pubblicazioni, articoli e collaborazioni con The Strad. Questo è un elemento importante perché fa parte della comunicazione internazionale sullo strumento, quindi questo è una delle attività di Alberto importanti, perché ti vedo fare conferenze in giro per il mondo su questo strumento, sempre molto seguite. Nel 2015 ha conseguito una laurea con lode e dignità di stampa in storia dell'arte e valorizzazione del patrimonio culturale. Nel 2018 giudice al 15° concorso internazionale triennale di Cremona e nel 2024 al Fifth China International Violin and Bow Making Competition. Vive e lavora a Genova e benvenuto.
Grazie Gabriele e grazie a molte persone per le quali oggi finalmente siamo qui a parlare del nostro. Vorrei anche ringraziare tutti coloro che hanno affrontato un viaggio. In particolar modo vedo che ci sono colleghi venuti da Cremona, persino dalla Germania, ecco, per avere un po' di informazioni. Il mio compito sarà quello di riunire un po' le vicende che hanno coinvolto il Cannone dalla sua donazione fino al dopoguerra, quindi sono quasi 100 anni, non sono pochi. Ebbene, ecco, fortunatamente abbiamo 10 minuti in più, così evito di chiedere il gesto per interrompere nel caso fossi prolisso nella narrazione. Ecco, anche perché, vedete, quando si parla di Cannone, per forza di cose nascono suggestioni personali forti. Noi abbiamo Paganini, il fascino del demoniaco, dello stregonesco, queste immagini di questo violino così espressionista. Vediamolo con questa luce radente in questa foto antica. Paganini, quindi con Paganini. Allora facciamo una cosa, partiamo dal macabro. Ecco, questa è un'immagine tra le tante che sono state fatte, un disegno appena successivo alla morte di Paganini, il 27 maggio occorsa a Nizza del 1840. Va ricordato che Paganini fu sofferente per questa tisi laringea dovuta alla sifilide. Nell'ultimo anno e mezzo era completamente muto, non poteva più parlare, e attraverso le lettere si può avere idea del carattere fortemente stoico, ma nel senso proprio filosofico del termine, col quale affrontava il dolore e la malattia. Il figlio ha 14 anni, Achille, muore e vediamo che a Nizza, ecco, in questa casa non lussuosa, collezione di strumenti straordinaria. Paganini ha raccolto, ecco, negli ultimi anni 7 violini di Stradivari, altri amati, 2 guarnieri del Gesù, 2 violoncelli Stradivari, 2 viole Stradivari, altri viola amati, per un totale di circa 20 strumenti, incluso il cannone nostro. A questo punto viene fatto l'inventario e le vicende che porteranno, ecco, al a portare il cannone. Ecco, a Genova saranno lunghe, saranno complesse. Qui io propongo ancora una volta il testamento per leggere il capoverso, perché ci può dare un'idea un pochino più approfondita di quella che è la personalità di Paganini. Non amo che gli artisti eseguiscano requiem per me. Mi saranno celebrate il numero 100 messe dai reverendissimi padri cappuccini. Leggo il mio violino alla città di Genova, onde sia perpetuamente conservato. Raccomando l'anima mia alla immensa misericordia del suo
To the pity of the creator. After Paganini's death, there were a few problems. The corpse was embalmed. Paganini was considered a sinner by the Archbishop of Nice, and the Archbishop of Turin just decided to go, or asked to find solutions, but it was in vain. So the situation was really complicated. He was buried only in the 50s in Parma, and there was a violin. Achille started thinking he could sell his father's collection, and it took quite a lot of time. The first letters were dispatched by the city, by the municipality in the early 50s. But Achille was a teenager. He was very young. He was a very responsible person, a very nice person. Here is Achille. He is very trendy, with a bow hat, with a hot red jacket or a shirt, and let's say that exchanges with the municipality were quite slow. The city wanted to have the instrument. Achille sort of waited. He had a wait-and-see attitude. Michele Casi, who was a theater actor here in Genoa, decided to put the case in a casing on a marble pedestal close to a bust from a former king. And in the end, there was this letter that was sent by Achille to the municipality in May 51. And there is, since all the problems of the glue that was used for the violin, there may be failures every now and then, and therefore the violin needs a very great care. I would propose, instead of having the violin, to sculpt a bust and to have it displayed. By the way, I have already ordered such a bust to be sculpted, and this bust could be placed in a permanent position for the city and be preserved forever. The city, of course, didn't accept, and the violin was handed over to the municipality in the end. This is the bust that was sculpted by Santo Varni. Two busts were actually sculpted. One is in a private collection now, and this is how the violin was placed in a bell jar. It was here in this building. It was a very large mobile cabinet. There was silk padding inside, and you can imagine the very difference in color compared to the wood. And then there were some memorabilia, a sword, and other memorabilia. Ma non si sente... And these were the civic memories of the city from then on. From that moment on, Cannone became a civic relic of the city of Genoa. It is now perpetually conserved. This was the intention. That means hands off. That means since this is sacred relic, well, that means that it cannot be used. You don't use historical swords for any reason whatsoever, and you're not going to play this violin for any reason whatsoever. So this was these were the first steps, but people began wondering about what should be done with that instrument. By the way, this is the bow that was in the casing. The Cannone was delivered without the stick, or at least there was no information about it. This was repaired by Guillaume because it was broken in several points, and this is really a relic stand post. You have allegories at the basement, and you cannot touch the object. You can just have a look at it, but you cannot really do anything with it. It's almost hidden to people's sight. And this is the first picture, the first photo I have found in the historical archives. You have sunlight that gives us a perfect view on every single detail. This is a perfect image of the Cannone. It's beautiful, healthy, in perfect conditions, and also you can see here you can see that you still have the soundboard fully coated as originally designed. It is so it is a relic. Nobody dared touch the Cannone out of respect. And clearly enough, it is an instrument that is fully assembled, but the strings within the bell, the glass bell, broke immediately. Camillo Sivori in 1854 was the first one who was in charge of replacing the strings. But the first 50 years passed by with no special events. We don't know who was allowed to see the Cannone. The cabinet was moved to different locations. Several rooms are mentioned in the archives. So the cabinet was initially here in this room. And these are the negative effects of conservation in the glass jar, under the glass dome. You see that the Cannone was used several times. In the 90s, it was played by Sivori and other violin players. And the bass is damaged. There is some brittleness down there, and it's really. It looks anoxic. It has this oblique position, and certainly that is not a good time for the Cannone. There were quite a lot of criticisms, first of all, at the appropriate or at conservation and at the use of the Cannone. The Cannone was used several times within the municipality, sometimes by officials of the municipalities. So there was a very violent polemic that started after that. We will only observe that some music was played with the Cannone to gratify all the people from Tursi, and this is a real insult to religion and art. It's an outrage to art, and this relic was given to the municipality for a completely different purpose. So the municipality of Genoa is clearly invited to change attitude. If they just want to listen to music, they can go to pubs within the city, but these relics should be protected forever. They should be sacred also for people who don't know what their value is, and therefore they should not accept this kind of use for this instrument. So 1907, Genoa was going through a decisive time from the point of view of architecture, from its structure as a whole. There was the main square of the city, Piazza de Ferrari, was totally redesigned. Some neighborhoods were completely renovated, new buildings were erected. There were architects, Cesare Gamba in particular, who redesigned the city. The bell tower that is very close to this building was displaced, and well, the press did cover all these events. It was quite a hectic historical event, and there were very different voices, a lot of polemic going on, and so they asked to stop using. Many voices asked to stop using the Cannone, and several people asked to check the real conditions of the Cannone. So Cesare Bisiak asked to be authorized to draw the true profile of the Cannone. And, well, he was denied permission, and he noticed, however, that there was a big problem with worms in the wood of the violin. Enrico Rocca, who used to be a painter when he was a young man, but then became a violin maker, and by the way, he designed and built furniture, but he was a real expert in wood. He was the expert who was consulted to know the real conditions of the Cannone, and he drew a dramatic picture of it. And same thing a few years later, Oreste Candi in 1914, after a concert, stated that there was a real problem on the back plate, and he also wrote an article for a newspaper and underlined that a violin that is not played is doomed, is not going to be preserved and conserved, and that was a problem. And here we are discussing about the same issue again. 1 century has gone by, but we are still discussing about this issue. It's really extremely difficult to understand what the best approach is to manage this asset. The system of conservation does not change. The Cannone is under a bell jar and will remain under a bell jar until 1937. In Cremona, to celebrate the death of Antonio Stradivari, representative of the fascist government, Mr. Farinacci, organized a major event dedicated to the violin. The violin had to therefore be transported to Cremona. That was the first journey for this violin. Well, it was considered that the violin should not be moved from its location. And so Cesare Candi was consulted, and he recommended some gluing on the part where the hand gets in contact with the violin neck. And that was absolutely needed and required. So the conditions of use of the violin up to that time had led to that condition. Candi was the person in charge of the restoration, and there was not much time to do that because the big event in Cremona was due in a few days, and Cesare Candi was given 3 days, just 3 days. He was locked in a room here in Tursi, and a notary deed was drafted to that end. I didn't find the document here at the municipality, but I found this document at a notary's office where we can understand something about what Mr. Candi was asked to do. The restoration work will be limited to the type of interventions listed in the letter from the municipality. No pieces or components will be added. Just new glue will be added, and the overall profile and outlook of the instrument will not be changed. So all the different tests and investigations that were performed over the years showed us that there are still some points that are not completely clear about what Candi did at that time, and we will hear the results from Grenoble today. But on top of, so certainly there had been let's say that the Candis did something perhaps at the level of the different ribs and other points that were not really listed in the initial letter from the municipality. The event in Cremona was very successful. You have here two experts, Max Müller and Friedling Hammer. They are smiling and charmed by the violin that is displayed in that wonderful, beautiful medieval palace. That was a major international event. I think there are still some videos that were taken at that time. There were authorities, people from the royal family visiting the event, and experts from all over the world. It was a major event for the Cannone that was displayed and exhibited to the world again in its beauty. Candi, by the way, was very clever. He refrained from replacing anything. So he didn't touch the tuning packs. He did not replace the bridge, for instance, but he reinserted the original bridge. He didn't clean the Cannone, as a matter of fact. So there is only the problem of that black spot that he mentions, but it is more difficult to identify. But after a few years, things got worse. In the 40s of the last century, there were celebrations scheduled here in Genoa just before the war. Then the war broke out, and the Cannone was withdrawn from its usual location. The war was going on. There was a risk of Genoa being bombed, and therefore he was put in a casing and then locked in a safe, and he was transferred to a bank, to the safe of a bank nearby, but the city was at risk, however, so it was moved to a bank to Lucca in Tuscany. And at a certain point, there was the suspicion that something was happening, there was a problem with the varnish, so there was an official inspection carried out. Candy was consulted again, and at a certain point, the violin traveled back to Tursi Palace. It was hidden, and when the war was over, the casing was opened again, and its conditions were considered to be acceptable. But that famous black spot somewhat had worsened. So it seemed that something had really happened there. And this is after the war. Paolo de Barbieri, the violin maker, that was a scion of Cesare Cambi, and his son Renato. He was a violin player, a very famous one. He was an international standing virtuoso. And when Candy died in 1947, Paolo de Barbieri was the new person in charge of checking the violin and repairing it. Well, let's say that the conservation was then handed over to Giuseppe Lecchi. There were some conflicts at that time. These people, well, all knew each other, but they were not in very good terms. And I must say that Paolo de Barbieri decided not to make any more Cannone model violins. So there certainly was a dispute. In this, I'd like to close by adding that perhaps what we can say is that you see that Renato de Barbieri he has a cigarette in his hand, but, well, he was not smoking. He had not lit his cigarette. We have to interrupt just for a few minutes. Thank you.
Questa affascinante panoramica sulla storia dello strumento, e dal 63 oggi, dal 63 al 2000 che cosa succede? Ne parla Bruce, benissimo. Quindi invito qui Bruce Carson. Bruce è una delle grandi voci nazionali e internazionali dell'expertise sulla liuteria e del restauro.
At the international level, an expert in violin making and restoration. I've seen some beautiful, magnificent instruments passing by his workshop in Cremona. He's got an excellent expertise, and he is a very gentle man and a very modest one. And it is indeed extremely, it is my pleasure to have him here today. He was born in Los Angeles. We're sorry, but the microphone is not working properly again. And he's been in charge of some public and private collections. He works in Cremona. and he worked with Andrea Moscone, and ever since the year 2000, he's been also the conservator of the Cannone. And there is something missing, which is from his biography. He's also a climatologist. You worked in meteorology, right? So you are a meteorologist. It's amazing. This man is full of surprises, but I'm sure we will be out for more during his presentation. I decided to read my presentation because I'm afraid I might leave something out, or I might forget something. So can you help me with the clicker here? Yes. Niccolò Paganini's violin, when I first saw it in 1972, was kept here in Palazzo Tursi in a closet in the old city council chamber, next to the room where we are now, right now. So more or less behind that radiator you see over there. And after locating the keeper of the keys, I managed to convince him, in my then fragile Italian, rather wobbly Italian, to let me see the instrument. Once the wooden door was opened, a second door was revealed, made of shatterproof glass, equipped with a lock and a red sealing wax applied by the secretary in charge. In this exhibition, only the front of the instrument could be seen without the possibility of observing it from every angle. The display in the cabinet included the other violin from the municipal collection, the work of Jean-Baptiste Violin, a very famous violin maker who was working in Paris at the time. He made a copy, which was then gifted to Paganini. Once owned by Niccolò Paganini, the violin subsequently passed on to his best student, Camillo Siveri, and today the instrument is obviously nicknamed unsurprisingly, the Siveri. But let's fast forward to June 2000. At the time, I was appointed violin maker curator of the violin. The violin's condition remained stable, but we began to monitor the temperature and the humidity in the cabinet. There was no concern whatsoever about light damage, as it was kept in the dark. However, knowing that the instrument had been attacked by woodworms in the past, we thoroughly cleaned it up and inspected the cabinet. The official responsible for the municipality of Genoa at the time was Maria Sanfilippo. One day, in an accident while closing the cabinet, seriously burnt her hand with hot sealing wax. The sealing wax at this point was abandoned permanently, once and forever. The nomination of Genoa European Capital of Culture in 2004 had shaken the tranquil situation of the instruments that had been dormant in the closet. The municipal official who succeeded Mrs. Sanfilippo is now Anna Rita Certo. It was then decided to modernize the display of historic violins in a room in the Palazzo Tursi Museum, still next to the old Sala Giunta. This room, therefore, became the Paganini room. 2 new display cases were procured, along with a third one for Paganini memorabilia. They were built by the Gopian Company, which specializes in museum display cases. I recall their display case for Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa at the Louvre. When the instruments were moved, they suddenly found themselves in the middle of a brightly lit room, bathed in direct sunlight. So we immediately installed a series of window filters and curtains to filter out the sunlight that otherwise could have damaged the delicate instruments. It took time to normalize the room temperature and humidity, which is now equipped with a humidifier. Moreover, with the invaluable assistance of the University of Florence and the CEAM company, a device was installed inside the display case in order to maintain a constant relative humidity. The temperature in the room directly influences the temperature inside the display cases, and by carefully controlling the room, we achieve an acceptable temperature range within the display cases. The lighting in the Paganiniana room is now within the 50 lux limit. The work in the new room and the excellent results are largely due to Mrs. Anna Rita Certi, who, with great committed and limited financial resources, managed to fulfill the requests of myself and my two invaluable Genoese collaborators, Alberto Giordano and Pio Molinaro, respectively. Moreover, for the new exhibition, after examining the oldest photographs of the violin, of the Cannone, it was decided to reproduce the instrument's appearance most closely to that in the photographs. The old images appear to predate any subsequent work carried out by violin restorers. We are convinced that these images faithfully reflect the instrument's appearance when it was delivered to the city of Genoa in 1851 by Baron Achilli, son of Niccolò Paganini. And it was by sheer chance that the accessories that were previously removed still existed, and they were duly catalogued in the museum, but unfortunately they were no longer in a condition to be reused. Copies of the accessories were built and mounted on the instrument for the exhibition in 2004. In previous years, due to various interventions and improvements made by predecessors, the instrument's appearance had been modified, modernized, and no longer tallied with the old photographs. When the instrument is played, we simply replace the gut strings used in Paganini's time with some modern ones and a bridge style currently in use. The violin is played with a chin rest and a shoulder rest, which have been specifically adapted to the instrument so as not to damage or touch the varnish. In the second half of the 19th century, Niccolò Paganini's was treated as a relic of the past, and Niccolò's Paganini il Cannone was played more and more, maybe far too much, because of a policy that was enforced by violins who had made pressure. And even before I became the curator, it showed clear signs of post-Paganini wear, not just the marks left by the great violinist. So today, for example, the marks of the chin rest and the shoulder rest are visible. These were 20th century accessories that did not exist in Paganini's time. Conservation, stricto sensu, does not necessarily imply the use of the instrument. Use, to a certain extent, is the opposite of preservation. Is there a middle ground for simultaneously preserving and enjoying an instrument originally designed for playing? And unlike some instruments of the past, which due to their structural deterioration cannot be played anymore, the violin is still used with a series of relatively minor modernation interventions. Undoubtedly, in our case, use should be severely limited to avoid a whole series of risks, which are likely to happen or to occur when the instrument leaves its case: transport, handling, rehearsals with a different violinist, concerts, temperature and humidity fluctuations. From my point of view, as a restorer of these instruments, I see all sorts of issues, from simple wear and tear to a small damage to extensive damage caused by an accident or the musician's destruction. Restorations by incompetent violin maker further damage the instrument. An instrument that is played regularly requires just as much maintenance. Clearly, from one day to the next or from one concert to the next, the instrument does not look like deteriorating. In any case, I've personally been playing long enough to see these changes within a generation or even within a few years. These changes are irreversible. In this sense, the canon is irreplaceable, and we must resist this path of no return through excess usage. I forgot to show you the glass case. The instrument's original neck had been lengthened at the heel, and then that is where it is linked to the soundboard and then nailed back into place. Many classical violins have had their necks replaced more than once, an operation we could never contemplate with such a violin because of its historical and musical significance. The bass bar, which is a spruce support positioned under the bass foot of the bridge. Unfortunately, I cannot use my clicker to highlight these things. So this is the bass foot, where you can find the bass bar. And in our case, the bass bar is a lot smaller than a normal bar, and allowing the arch to deform. Probably this had already happened at Paganini's time and would continue to deform if the violin were to be played continuously. Here you can see the differences between the treble side and the bass side. In these images, the instrument is not subjected to the load of tuning, where the deformation increases even further. Several gluing surfaces, especially the neck and back blocks, are compromised and should never be stressed for long periods. On top of that, the back block that holds the strain of the strings is almost broken into two. And the varnish is soft, and it's very sensitive to the musician's perspiration. It softens considerably during a concert, and therefore we must impose periodic breaks during rehearsals. Examination of the canon with the light of the synchrotron in Grenoble has revealed for the first time unequivocally and concretely the potential weaknesses of this splendid violin. There are lurking dangers that worsening with frequent use might compromise the instrument's future use and playability. I would like to thank all those who have collaborated over the years for their interest and sensitivity shown in preserving this instrument. And they have been tried to abide by Paganini's wish, that is to say, that my violin be perpetually preserved.
Grazie mille, Bruce.
Thank you so much, Bruce. I'd like to thank all the previous speakers also for their rich presentations and for following the schedule very closely. We are ahead of time, so let's say we have time for questions. This is the right time for questions. We have gone through all the presentations. I'm curious about one point, a question to Mr. Giordano. What is the relationship between Parma and Genoa? So the bow and the body of Paganini are in Parma and the violin is in Genoa. Why? Is there a historical reason for that? Well, the bow is Genoa, by the way, is here in, it's broken in two pieces. This was due not to negligence or to bad preservation, but it was the problem with a rib that was used at that point, the natural material. What about the relationship between Parma and Genoa? Yes, it's true. There is some degree of rivalry between the two cities. We consider them to be outsiders, but they accepted and welcomed Paganini's corpse, and they had, the Paganini family had a villa close to Parma in Vaiona, and they lived there for quite a long time. I think today the villa is part of a religious facility. The collection of the family has been lost, but I think we should thank Parma because they allowed a dignified burial to our hero. If there are no questions, I would perhaps recommend a short break, a 20 minutes break. At 11:30 sharp, we will resume our session. Thank you. who gave us a general idea of the magic that surrounds the Cannone, whereas now we will focus on the results of the investigations conducted by these facilities in Grenoble. We are specialized in X-rays. X-rays, this is how they were called when they were discovered. Nobody knew exactly what they were. It was 1895. Mr. Röntgen described them. He used X-rays on his wife's hands, and there was this radiation that could penetrate no mass, no odor whatsoever. First Nobel Prize in 1891, and the history of X-rays got started. They could reproduce images that cannot be seen by our naked eye. It was used at the beginning in medicine, or today we use them in airports, at security checks. They are very much used for material testing. And what are they? Well, basically, X-rays are visible, are light, but the wavelength for visible light is in the scale of the micron, so we can see objects. So at that level of scale, X-ray, the X-ray wavelength is 1 billionth of a meter, or fraction of a billionth, and this distance is the typical distance between atoms. And we can thus imagine that this radiation can be used to obtain images at the scale of atoms size. And here we are with the synchrotron. The synchrotron light can produce X-rays with exceptional, outstanding properties. This allows us to see sources whose intensity and features are approximately 100 billion higher than what would be possible with the conventional cathode tube technology, which is used on a routine basis in several centers. The synchrotron light is produced by electrons accelerated in this tunnel. We see the circumference size is about 1 kilometer, and these are used to produce light through deceleration and acceleration. And as we see in this plotting, this is the high level of intensity that can be achieved through these operations. Thanks to this light, we may work on several applications. The idea is to get to know the structure of condensed matter with atomic resolution. So there are many, many applications. The baseline is that if we know the structure, we can connect the atomic structure of objects with its properties and characteristics, with implications in medicine, chemistry, in understanding the extreme conditions of the matter, volcanology, and so on. And one of the possible applications is the use of these sources in the field of cultural heritage, as previously mentioned by other speakers. And lately, in Grenoble, over the past decade, we have designed a new piece of equipment whose characteristics allow scientists to advance their investigation skills. there have been a few improvements, huge improvements. A test that required 1 year to be performed in the past, all of a sudden may be carried out in a day's time. And it is in this framework that our testing on the Cannone were conducted, as we will learn in a few minutes. There is another point to be remembered. In the world, there are approximately 30 to 40 synchrotron facilities. And in Grenoble, we have 2 of these facilities. There is one in Chicago and another one in Zurich. They started up their operations 2 years ago or 1 year ago. And so those are the ones that are most commonly used today. So there is a European source, Beamline, funded by 19 countries, including Italy. This is some data about our activity. 2,000 publications per year, 10,000 visitors, scientists visiting our facility. 30% of our work is targeted to industrial applications or cultural applications, and for Nobel Prizes also. And very rapidly, the idea is through science and through this unique research facility to allow countries to work more closely, to promote research beyond X-ray, and to better understand the complexity of materials in order to optimize their functioning, and also, of course, to attract and to share knowledge among younger generations. So this was my introduction, and now we are going to listen to Paul Taffarot, who's in charge of the beamline that was used on the Cannone, and certainly this fully utilizes and makes use of the benefits coming from the new beamline, allowing to discover points that were unknown up to a little time ago. So I give the floor to Paul. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, but I'm not speaking Italian, so I will speak
Mi spiace perché parlerò inglese anziché italiano.
Not sure that it is so useful. This morning I will show you the technical results and the techniques we used to image the Cannone in Grenoble. As you can see, it was a real team effort with many people involved. At the end of the talk of Luigi, you will have more details about the team composition. So, the general context of this experiment. In fact, in October 2023, Francesco Sette has been contacted to make a general check of the quality of the status of the Cannone. The idea was to know if it was still able to play, to make a big concert in the front of the King Charles III. So it's clear that making tomography was the best solution to see the internal structure and to have an idea about the general quality, but normal tomography will not bring enough details. So for that, the best way is to use phase contrast tomography. I will show you a bit more what it is. And to do that, to use a synchrotron source instead of a normal X-ray machine. So you have plenty of synchrotron in the world, as Francesco just showed, but currently there is only one in the world where we can image large objects with strong phase contrast, and it is at the SRF on the beamline BM18. So, as I said, we use tomography. The tomography, it is the fact that you can see the internal structure of an object on slices. It can be real tomography, so physical tomography like this one. It can also be virtual tomography in a non-destructive way, typically using X-rays, but you can also do that with neutrons and with other techniques. But the main interest is when you use these techniques, you don't destroy the object you are studying. So for that, we can use this kind of giant flying saucers that are called the synchrotrons. And in this case, we use the one in Grenoble, that is the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility. And as I will show you, we can reach very high level of quality, of details and so on, that are completely out of the reach of laboratory machines for the moment. So I will not go deep in physics because I'm not physician at all, physicist at all. But here you have the principle of the synchrotron. So you have a linear accelerator that will make packet of electrons. These electron bunches are injected in the booster, that is the first circular part, where they go nearly to the speed of light. At this level of energy, we speak in energy and not anymore in speed, so it is 6 giga electron volts. It's something like 99.999% of the speed of light. So you have to imagine the real speed of what you see right now. It is at the speed of light, so it's going really, really fast. With these electron bunches, once they are injected in the storage rings, the large ring around, each time they go through magnetic field, they are deviated and they lose part of their energy in the form of photons, in the form of light. That is the synchrotron light. And when you have an high energy machine like the ESRF, most of this energy is in the X-ray range. So the main interest is that this X-ray beam that we collect in 40 different beamlines at the ESRF are extremely intense, but also makes possible specific techniques. Imaging is only one of them, but you will see what it means in terms of the results we can reach. So as I said, I will not go very far in the physics details. There is only one thing that is interesting to understand before I show you the result on the violin. The thing is, if you use a laboratory source, a laboratory microtomograph, what you do is what we call tomography with absorption contrast. It is the same phenomenon than when you go to the hospital and you can have an X-ray with your bones. You see that the bones are absorbing more, that's why they are white on the radiograph. But you just see a kind of shadow picture. There are some details, but they are not so impressive. When you have a synchrotron source, if you increase the distance between the sample and the detector, if you put, in our case, we go up to 30 meters like that, the X-ray beam itself will make interferences. And these ones will become much more sensitive than anything you can do with a lab source. And this is what we use to study this violin. It's a way to increase a lot the contrast without increasing the X-ray dose. So here is an example of what you can do with phase contrast. What you have on the picture, it's a radiograph of an amber piece, so it's a fossil tree resin. I used to be paleontologist, so this one is a fossil tree of 90 million years. With absorption, you see nothing. Exactly the same picture, but with phase contrast. And then you can see an improvement of the signal to noise by 1,000 times. So you can really detect very tiny things. The thing is, it's easy to do on small objects, but it becomes very, very difficult to do on large objects. And that's why we need the ESRF and why we need BM18 to study a violin with a strong phase contrast as we needed. So, let's go to the experiment itself. It was done last year in March, and we used a specific system to control humidity and temperature. Humidity was controlled within 1%, temperature within ½ degree. And we used a new generation of detectors to make sure that we use low dose of X-rays, because X-rays can be harmful. So we use as less X-rays as possible to have the best possible data quality. The experiment took 2 days, and we generated 45 terabytes of data during this experiment. So it's not the largest one we can do, clearly not. But let's say it was already quite an intense experiment. To make sure that this experiment would be a success, we made 3 other ones just before. So we had the request in October 23. We made the first feasibility experiment in November 23. Then another feasibility in January 24. And finally, just a few hours before the experiment itself, we made the last scan of another violin to make sure that everything was fine. And nothing worked when we made the last test, as always. So we took 2 or 3 hours to make sure that everything is secured, and finally we went with the real experiment. So for this experiment, we made 2 complete scans of the violin at 35 microns. Why 2? Because we made one without tension on the strings, and the second one with tension. And by making the correlation between the 2 scans, you can see every single part of the violin that moves due to the tension of the strings. So for us, it was really a very important test. But in addition to that, we also made series of zooms down to 2.2 microns, so where you can see the structure of the wood, to be able to see each defect. So what you have there, it is the basic principle of the tomography. We make radiographs of the object during rotation. With all these radiographs, so in reality it is an helical movement, with all these radiographs we will project the radiographs, back project the radiographs, and it gives you a series of slices. So you have the first view of the 3D structure, internal structure of the violin. What you have there is one of the scans at 35 microns. Once you have this stack, you can open the stack in the 3D software, and then you have the 3D reconstruction of your violin, where you can already see a lot of things. And finally, after quite some efforts, you can separate all the different parts, put false color and so on, and so it can give you quite nice 3D rendering, but I would say it's nice to have beautiful picture, but it's just the beginning of the story. The thing is after what we can do with this thing. So during this experiment, we had just 2 days. The first day was devoted for the low-resolution scan, so 35 microns. For us, it's low-resolution scan. For many people, it's very high resolution. And during the first night, I analyzed the data rapidly in order for the second day to make the zooms, to know where we have to make the high-resolution scan. So during this first night, I was able to make the first assessment of all the different defects. So I will just show you few examples of what we did in few hours. So what gave us the main, the first glance of the quality of the instrument. First, you can see on this one the cracks at the bottom of the violin. I don't know if you can always see the details. No, it's not working with this one. Okay. So we are in the bottom of the instrument, and you have some cracks that have been seen on photographs just before. You have the insect track in the middle. This one I will come back to this one with a lot of details. Then you can see an unglued corner. In fact, you have plenty of small defects everywhere. I mean, it's a quite old instrument, so you expect to have some defects. So you have ungluing in many of the corners like that. But you also have cracks on the side, as you can see. Okay, thanks. So yes, you have the cracks there, but you have also a major ungluing at this position. So it is there on the violin. It corresponds at the position where the end of the violinist is touching the violin when you go in the high frequencies. So this one is a quite large ungluing. In the neck fixation, I will come a lot after on the neck fixation. There are, in addition to the modifications, you have a lot of cracks. You have a really complex network of cracks. Then you can also see some cracks in the back of the violin. You can see this crack. And you have another one on the other side, a kind of symmetric crack. I'm not sure, but it can be due to a previous dismounting of the violin, something where the back of the violin was separated from the rest. I'm not sure of that. It's just, I see the same cracks on both sides, so it's an hypothesis. Anyway, these cracks are not really large, and they are not so much problematic. You have also a very small crack in the head of the violin that you can see there on the A string. Previous modifications, there were quite some modifications in this one. Here you can see a small triangle of wood that has been added at the bottom. And finally, I think this one is the last one I show as a rapid example. It has been repaired with a different piece of wood in this corner. You see the bottom right corner. So it's a different piece of wood that has been added after modification. And now let's go to advanced analysis, because this one is really, it was to show you the kind of picture we had during the experiment. And now let's go to what you can do after analysis of this experiment. So the next step, I found about 150 defects like that, so you can imagine that the list is long. That's why I'm not showing everything. But the next step is to go really in 3D analysis. So you take the volume and you separate every single part of the violin, and then after you try to characterize all the defects. So here you have the violin in 3 dimensions. This picture with false color shows what we can do once we make the segmentation. So it means each different color is a different part that has been virtually separated. And from that, you can do plenty of things. So you can see a lot of details outside, but then you can go inside. It is like an endoscopy, except that there used to be a paper on the neck fixation. Here you can remove it, but also you can really separate everything and see all the different parts. So here we are in the neck fixation, and you can easily see the different parts that have been added, modified. You can see the traces of every single nail, and you can see the remaining nails, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you have plenty of things. Honestly, I think there was more than one modification of the neck fixation. It still has to be fully analyzed, but my feeling is you have at least 2 or 3 different levels of modifications in the neck. Then you can separate every single part like that. And it's not, I will not show it today, but from each part you can calculate a thickness map, curvature, you can do plenty of analysis that are possible with 3D data. So this one is the first step. So once you have such kind of data, you can make a 3D analysis of the general shape, of the general properties, and so on. But what was really interesting for us was to go in the study of the defects, the main problems. So as I said, we found 150 different things, different points that can be noticed, but we have 3 main ones, the ones that were really of concern to know if it is dangerous or not to use this violin. So the first one is the insect tract in the middle of the table. This one is a really impressive one. So for that, we made a specific scan at 8.5 microns, and we make the central column, the middle line of the table. Here you have the 3D segmentation of the insect tract. As you can see, it's a very long one, and in many places, it's taking nearly the full thickness of the wood. So you can see it in green there. So at the beginning, you have small ones when it was still a larvae, and after it is the adult insect, so the diameter is larger. So the insect itself, you can still find some small parts of the insect inside the hole, but there is no living insect, so no problem with that. And we go even at higher resolution, at 2.5 microns, and at this resolution you can see that there is a crack at the bottom that goes completely through the table. So it means on several centimeters, the table survives only through 50 microns of varnish and wood. All the rest is completely removed. Here you have a tangential view with the insect tract on the right, and you can see the fracture that reaches the internal part. So this one, when we saw that, it was really a big concern. But you will see after how we can really understand if there is a risk or not. The second big issue are the cracks at the bottom of the violin, where you have the string tension that is applied. So again, we made an higher resolution scan of this part at 8.6 microns. So we start with the 35 microns, and then we go with the 8.6. In blue and yellow, it is where you have the main fractures, the ones that are really, really important. You have plenty of small ones, but I show only the big ones. So you can see 3 main orthogonal fractures, and these ones can be of concern because they are really in a very important part of the violin where you have all the tension from the strings. And the last part where you have important defects, it is the neck fixation, the one that has been modified several times. So again, we have a higher resolution scan, but for this one I just use the basic one. So we are at 35 microns, and all these blue and yellow things are cracks. So you can see the wood structure. It's because I made a rendering. I made that a bit in the reads in the last 3 days, so the rendering is not very good. But you can see that you have cracks everywhere. That's really the point. And you have the nails that are completely corroded. You have holes of the previous nails. You have wood nails also in the middle. And so seeing so many cracks all related together, this one was really a major concern. So the thing is, we see a lot of defects, but it does not mean that they are a real danger for the instrument. The thing is, if they are not moving, when you put the tension on the strings, so they are not active defects, then they are not direct risk. So that's why we made the last part of this experiment, that is the digital volume correlation. The digital volume correlation, we take the two scans at 33 microns, with and without the tension on the strings, and we compare them. So on the top part, you can see the two scans superimposed and the general curvature of the violin, the weights moving when you put the tension. The bottom picture is a picture of the quantification of displacement. And then we checked for the three main defects if we have movements. The first one are the insect tracks. What you can see with the digital volume correlation is the insect tract is invisible. There is absolutely no movement when you put the tension on the string. There is no movement on the level of the insect tracks. So it means that this big hole is not a danger if you play the violin. It's a danger if you touch directly on it, for sure, because you have, for some places, you have only 50 microns. If you touch from inside, it's even worse. But playing it, it's not a big issue. As long, I don't know if it affects the sound, but at least there is no risk. You will not see the violin cut in two pieces while playing along the track of the insect, because the tracks are along the main wood fibers, and most of the solidity of the wood comes from the direction of the fibers. So it means, basically, you lost a very small part of the table along the wood structure, but the rest is still functional. So it means there is no risk for this part. The second one is the bottom wood block. I showed you the three big fractures. And in fact, when you look at the movement, you can see the concentration of strength where you have the strings, the button, but there is no movement at all on the fractures. It's really surprising, but it's not moving at all. So again, these fractures are impressive, but are not at all a risk. So they are not active when you play. For the moment, I see Jean-Philippe moving here. They are not a risk for the moment. I'm not saying that in 100 years it's still the case. And the last one is the neck fixation. In this one, you have a superimposition of the tomographic slices and the strain map. And what you can see is most of the strains are still concentrated on the nails. So the nails look very bad, they are completely corroded and so on, but in fact, the corrosion made them probably stronger than they used to be. The corrosion went everywhere in the wood structure, and because of that, everything became very solid, and you have a concentration of all the tension of the strings directly on the nail and on the corrosion part around the nails. The fractures, again, because you have strong fractures, they are not moving at all. You can see in this picture, if I can find the mouse, yes. The main fracture is there. And it's completely dark blue, so it's not moving. You have a second one at the bottom there. So this means that all the fractures we saw, both on the bottom and on the neck fixation, are not moving when you put the tension on the strings. So conclusion of all that, okay, the Cannone is old, 282 years, but it's still in good shape. There are plenty of defects everywhere, but we were expecting something like that on a so old instrument. But still, none of them are really a risk. The insect tract, it's impressive, but not a risk for playing. It's a risk if you touch it. For sure, we have to make sure that nobody never touches this part. It's really, really fragile. But other than that, we considered that there was no immediate risk to play with this violin. Just to go back in the context, it was to know if the violin could be used for the concert in the front of the King Charles III. So after all this analysis, we said, for what we see, it can be played, and indeed it was played. And as far as I know, it did not break during the concert. I mean, I was not there at the concert, but as far as I know, everything went well. So, and with that, I'm done. So, but it's not the end of the story. It was just the health check, let's say. And now let's go to the study of the violin itself with the presentation of Luigi.
Purtroppo non possiamo tradurre perché manca il microfono.
Andava prima, non con questo bianco. Ma no, questo è un preciso.
J'ai un autre adaptateur sur un USB-C.
Questo qua di chi è? Questo di Paul. Proviamo questo?
Ah, c'est bon, c'est bon.
Ma prende male.
Touche plus l'ordinateur.
Allora fallait pas toucher il cable. Una minima botta e se ne devo andare. Prende male. Faccio con l'USB-C che ora va.
Allô? Sorry for the inconvenience.
Chiedo scusa per questo piccolo...
Forse parlo italiano. Allora, buongiorno a tutti.
Good morning, everyone.
I risultati.
I shall try to integrate what has already been said by Paul concerning the conservation of the violin with some considerations, organological considerations, which can be inferred from our measurements. And as a physician, I would also like to say something more about the acoustic of this violin and also characteristic of other musical instruments. First of all, from a historical standpoint, Paganini had a lot of violins, Stradivarius, one Bergonzi, two Amatis, but throughout his life, he preferred to use his canon, as he used to call it, because as you can tell from its name, the canon has an acoustic prowess, an incredible, powerful projection compared to all other violins. So the question I would like to ask myself is, from the synchrotron analysis, can we garner some more information, new information about the acoustic prowess of the violin? So we will see whether, thanks to this synchrotron analysis, we can actually put pen to paper that this violin is extraordinary. Well, all the elements making up the violin are there for contribute to the acoustic of the violin, and it's obvious that the wood is of paramount importance, is key to the acoustic. There are various species which are used in the violin making. The soundboard is made of red maple, the ribs from maple, ebony for the keyboards. And wood is extremely important because it is an orthotropic material, namely, it is very flexible, it is highly flexible, and it entails some very excellent acoustic performances. And everything depends on the wood grain and the various directions it can take. And red maple is used for the soundboard because it has a considerable importance in terms of transmission of the sound, which is anisotropic. And this is why it is used in the soundboards. Maple is used because it is very elastic and it has a considerable mass, so it is used for the blocks and for the ribs. And so the structure of the violin is important. The wood transmits the vibrations along all the body of the violin. So whenever a musician uses a violin, it knows pretty well that the whole of the violin vibrates and all of its parts come into play whenever producing the sound and whenever the sound comes into contact with the air. The most important part of the violin is the body, which it can be found in the resonating chamber, and it amplifies through air multiscattering the sound from the block to the soundboard. And then there is the sound post, which is important, and the bass bar. The bass bar gives solidity to the soundboard, and on top of that, it emphasizes the small frequencies. It therefore contributes to project the sound. The lowest frequencies have a longer wavelength, and therefore they contribute to this longer, wider projection. That is why the violin gives the impression of being a powerful instrument with a powerful projection. The shorter the higher frequencies contribute to the timbre. So this violin is different from the Stradivari's violins, and the central body is relatively larger. I compared these measurements with the Kressler and the ones taken for the BM18. So the Cannone has an asymmetry on the right-hand side of the violin, and grosso modo, we can say that the form used by Guarnieri del Gesù was very similar to that of Kressler. And I would also like to pinpoint that Guarneri's chips are slightly larger. So as the the C bouts slightly larger, and this contributes to make the edges of the violin and the ribs more flexible. If we have a look at all the sections which were measured on the BM18, the ribs have a thickness of 1.2 to 1.4, centimeters, and well, considering that the ribs are 280 years old and the wood tends to reduce itself, I'd say that the ribs were probably bent when they were of 1.1 millimeters. So this means that Guarneri had quite a tall order whenever doing this, because at this thickness, the ribs are likely to destroy themselves. So this masochist task was wanted, was looked for by Guarneri del Gesù. And we believe that for acoustic reason, Guarneri del Gesù opted for thicker ribs in order to better support the soundboard and above all to allow for a better sound from the soundboard. This is a study of the inner part of the Cannone, and as you can tell, you can see the signature feature of the Cannone, that is to say the end pin. You can see also the thickness of the back, which are thickened all the way up to the end pin and to the button. And you might know the construction of the Amati. There is a difference between the Amati violins and the Stradivari's violins. There is some sort of rigidity, thanks to this method, on the very back. So Guarneri del Gesù created, in a nutshell, some sort of loudspeaker. So the membrane had to vibrate and therefore had to disperse less energy. And it's obvious that the projection, the sound projection, is much louder. Mr. Salabue stated that this violin was badly built with a horrible neck. But I was, on the contrary, absolutely flabbergasted by the precision of the boards and of the table, of the tables. As Mr. Carson said, there is a small plastic deformation at the back of the violin because of the bus bar. It's like a 0.5 millimeter. And the structure of the circle arching of the violin is considerable. In the first part of the picture, you see the so-called hall of the Guarneri. The Guarneri used to do that inside the violin, at the middle of the violin, and it is a bit of a mystery because nobody understands what was the purpose of this hall in the joint, in its joining with the back, so with the risk that the violin might break down completely. So the hole corresponds to the maximum of arching of the table. And nobody knows who invented the violin, but certainly somebody who might have been aware of some optical aspects or some optical observations. This hole is indeed very special, and it could this be said to be the mass center or the gravity center, the balance center of the violin? Well, this is between the button and the bridge. So, but these are just, on my part, mere assumptions. And there is yet another thing that we're finding difficult to understand. I try to use all my weight and pierce a hole inside a maple wood table, and I was not be able to do that. We would have to use a hammer to do that. So it is extremely difficult to make such a hole. And you can see that the fibers are very complex. There is no torsion here applied. So it has to be a very sort of violent drilling of this hole. But why on earth would somebody want to make such a hole inside a violin? This is yet again, this is still very much of a mystery nowadays. Unfortunately, the CT scans, which are now available, are scarce. They're low quality, poor quality, and they do not help us very much. We find it very difficult to use these measurements in our scientific research. And this is, of course, a message that I would like to throw into the fray of our discussion. It could be used in the future. But I would like to focus now on the bus bar of the violin. It is very subtle, very thin. It might be Baroque, but I'm not sure whether the Baroque instruments had such a thin brass bar. But the brass bar of the Cannone is 7.7 millimeters thick, and normally it would be 11 to 12 millimeters thick. And from an acoustic point of view, a light bass bar, a thin bass bar is perfect if you don't want the violin not to play anymore. You just have to put the mute on your bridge to make it sound less resounding. For those who do not believe me when I say that this is an old bass bar, I would like to show you that the surface has undergone some erosion over the past years because of wear and tear. Red maple, due to wear and tear, is eaten up with the aging of the instrument. And I'd say that this bass bar is extremely old, and no intervention was done in order to remove this bass bar. You see that the gluing is perfect. There is no defect whatsoever. There were no unglued joints. And the bass bar from top to bottom was simply damaged through playing. So, what are the ingredients to build a Cannone? Well, first of all, a thick back, thick ribs, a thin bass bar, a light bass bar, and a projection of the neck, which in order to lower the tension on the table, on the board, and then the step length, which is extremely long on the Canon. All these features, all these characteristics make it possible to have resonating low frequencies, and therefore these gives more acoustic prowess to the instrument. So Paganini used to play on the low frequencies of the G string, and he said that the G string was its pride of place, was its the apple of his eyes, and that is why he played so many concerts and so many instrumental pieces on the G chord, on the G string. When I had a look at the results of the digital volume correlation, I was really astounded because these were the first images of a soundboard of a musical instrument. In order to get these measurements on such an instrument as the violin, we need BM18 of the ESRF. We cannot acquire such a resolution in tuned or untuned conditions. I thought that they looked very much like the frequencies of the soundboard. As to the strain, there are various other techniques. For instance, Fioravanti performed the optical interferometry, and the data garnered with digital correlation helped us to better understand how the various parts of the violin can react to strain. This is just to give you an idea of how important it is to analyze the strain. And I can get a lot of information from these images. First of all, how the sound post can react to the soundboard. These, of course, are static measures, and it's obvious that the violin also vibrates according to the pre-stressed conditions applied on the soundboard. There have been lots of studies on the acoustics of the violin, but the greatest majority of these studies cannot use some clear-cut physical data, and therefore I believe that the measurements that have been now been garnered thanks to this new research will clearly entail many more studies and interesting discoveries. I wanted to have a look at these measurements and try to reproduce them on another violin. The digital volume correlation was performed with gut strings, whereas Fioravanti's experiment were carried out with a set of modern strings. And this, of course, changes everything because the gut string strain is a lot lower than normal strings. And surprise, surprise, if we compare the modern violin to the Cannone, we'll see that the strains are more or less the same. Mechanically, the strain applies always the same, but there are some differences. In the case of the modern violin, the strains are more distributed along the entire board, whereas in the Cannone, they are condensed in some specific areas. And even here where you've got some split joints along the ribs, and mechanical engineers use these split joints to better understand also the mechanical stress and its consequences, its implications. So these strains are extremely important because they almost represent some sort of fingerprint of the acoustics, that is to say, what the violin has been going through over the past centuries. Violins, whenever they vibrate and when they are being played by talented musicians, they undergo the dynamic wooden hardening. That is to say, the wood becomes stiffer and more resonant over time due to the various strains applied. And all these experiments are currently being carried out, and I'm curious about their outcome. And what about the future? How can we go about the analysis on the acoustics of the violin? Well, we can use the strain studies, that is to say the strain on the violin, to better understand the modal analysis of the violin by applying pre-stress conditions and also the sound projection of the instrument. It is obvious that this will be possible thanks to synchrotron light, because synchrotron light enables us to use advanced applications, and they are also being used not only for restoration purposes, but also for the sake of building new violins. And our aim is to have a digital twin of the violin, so that we will be able to better understand how ancient or historical violins were built, were produced, and to better understand their acoustic prowess. So, to conclude, for those who are interested in acoustics, I would say that a non-invasive, non-destructive analysis can tell us a lot about the inner structure of the violin without disassembling it. And it's obvious that thanks to high-resolution images, we can capture the most inner details of the material used, that is to say wood, which otherwise would not be visible with any other technique. And all these research will also help us to create replicas and to create images for the future. So this study will be left in the hands of the municipality of Genoa, and they will certainly use it to better preserve and conserve the violin in the years to come. And on top of that, this research is extremely important for any violin maker. Violin makers can be, and students can be educated, can be taught these acoustic details, this acoustic research, so as to better use historical violins and other historical instruments. And last but not least, violins and other instruments have an historical interest, and they are part and parcel of the cultural heritage of humanity. So they have no price, they have an important legacy, and we really do hope that the next generations will be able to access all these precious information. But this is not the end of it. In Grenoble, we have a new tomographer with which we can use, with the same resolution, larger instruments. These, for instance, is the whole stringed family. We've got altos, cellos, violins, and also double bass. So in the future, we will have the possibility of studying larger instruments with the same detailed and meticulous precision and detailed precision. Well, I would like to conclude with some acknowledgements. Well, to carry the Cannone from Genoa to Grenoble is a long, long way indeed, is a long route. It's a long route in terms of, in legal terms. We are not a museum, and so I had to learn to go through the meanders of standard facility reports. We had to ask for the signatures of two different French ministers, that of culture and that of the interior. Otherwise, the Cannone would have never been able to leave Italy. So the cooperation was extremely interesting. So first of all, my heartfelt thanks to Gérardet, who was the ambassador of the Paganini competition. And I would also like to thank all the team of the Paganini competition, and then all the municipality of Genoa, starting from the former mayor of Genoa, Bucci. He was the first one was present in Paris, and since he's a chemist, he knew pretty well what had to be done in order to take the violin to Grenoble without damaging its conditions. And then I would like to thank also the Marco Chiara. I received lots of phone calls, and I could hardly make head or tail of any of them until Mr. De Marco really helped me to see some sense into all this. And I would also like to thank all the Italian authorities who helped me out. But last but not least, my heartfelt thanks goes out to Tafferò. He is in charge of the BM18. He is the mastermind behind all this. And I would also like to thank his collaborators. Whenever we talk about the violin, everybody is interested in pulling their act together. I would like to thank Francesco Nerone for the data processing and for all the ins and outs he performed. And then whoever was in charge of the the new detectors. We tested the new detectors that will be used for the Google Maps of the human being. Can you imagine that? It's incredible. And then Mr. Vattier, who performed the agronomic study on the violin. And then Sodini from Trieste, who participated in the experiment. Bruce and Alberto, who performed the measurements. And I would also like to thank them for giving me the possibility of holding the Cannone into my hands. And then Bernini Bertoglio, he managed to get hold of the French ministers and get their signature in no time. And then, of course, Francesco Seto, our former Director General. Without him, it would have been impossible to have the bean time to perform such measurements. And last but not least, I would also like to thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. These were a beautiful presentation and outstanding images, such a big object. This is a new frontier. Thank you so much. And the enthusiastic round of applause is there to testify how appreciated your work is. So really, it's always something we do see when there is such outstanding work performed on instruments. I don't know whether the people who are following us from remote connections can ask questions. No, it's not allowed, I'm sorry. But, well, let's fish for questions here. Thank you very much for these very interesting images. My question is the following. This is a type of a technology that requires very complex logistics. You cannot organize such a trial very often, of course. But from the point of view of sustainability and of future research, this is something I'm reflecting upon. May we imagine, somehow figure out that these investigations may be repeated after some time, I don't know, in 10 years or 15 years from now, so that they may be used as a basis for future comparisons, so that, let's say, every, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, these investigations may be repeated, something that might be acceptable and sustainable. So this is basically my question. Many of these projects, unfortunately, are just one-off projects, and for many reasons, but from the conservator's point of view, repeating these investigations, following an investigation plan, a long-run investigation plan would be a dream come true. Perhaps the best person to answer this question is me. I'm asking you, since I've been the Director General of the Synchrotron facility. Using the synchrotron is allowed to the teams of the member countries, provided that this type of the research that they conduct has no war purposes or related purposes. So it's open, access is open, and all the related cost is borne by the synchrotron facility. The real costs for the experiment is approximately 5,000 euros for 8 hours of investigation, using one of the 47 beam lines that are available at our facility. Who can access? Panels, committees, expert panels that are third-party, independent experts or scientists from all over the world. There are some specialized panels on cultural heritage investigations. These expert panels meet once a year, and they discuss about experiments or investigations that have been applied, and they just compare the various applications, and they issue a ranking, and then we allow access to our facility. So let's say that it's a very competitive application procedure, but well, this is how we proceed. For this specific type of experiment, we have the so-called fast lane. 5% of the time, 5% of the times, it's the general managers of the facility that may give the green light and have a final word on who can access the experiment. This was the case for the Cannone. It was clear that it was that we urgently needed to find the answers to some critical questions. To be more precise in my reply, my answer, I would add that we have access procedures that allow to plan investigations over a very long time period, 3 to 5 years, for instance. So the facility is there, the structure is there, and of course we are ready to make our skills available. If I may add, we have submitted another project together with Riccardo Angeloni. The name of the project is Oscar. It's an EU project, small-size project, and we have applied for a 2-year funding in order to carry out measurements on cellos, violins, historical cellos and violins, and we have obtained a letter of agreement from the Museum of Cremona. Unfortunately, the application was rejected, also because it was an individual application, and so there was no network applying. So I think that we now have understood what we should do, and we have time to really build up a network with which we may file future applications to obtain funding to perform these tests and investigations. A more technical question, perhaps. You showed that we can go into minute details to identify defects or problems within the structure and the texture of the material. First question. When the instrument is being played, might we imagine that the similar tests may be performed? So the idea is really to understand whether such tests could be performed while the violin is being played, that is to say, while it is under stress. And there is another question. We have been in touch with people who are expert in acoustics and of instruments and other materials, and this is quite an interesting area of investigation. Imagine all the different types of damage that may occur to an instrument due to several causes. I don't know whether you use the technique of noise input so that you can listen to the instrument at rest and you can investigate into its reactions when temperature changes, for instance. So have you ever thought of carrying out investigations in this respect, or could you add perhaps this kind of investigations to what you are already doing, which I think the results or the observations might add a lot. For a microtomography measurements, this is a bit complex. It takes 1 hour, half an hour to have a full scan for real-time measurements on violin acoustic vibrations. I candidly confess we have never thought about that, but we should work on how to find a strategy to perform stroboscopic measurements. I don't know whether this can be done while the violin is being played. Well, forse non ho capito esattamente la domanda. Cioè, sì, però
really while playing is very difficult, but what would be possible is to use acoustic wave to activate the violin for a given frequency, and then to do the scan in a stroboscopic way. It means you trigger a picture when you are always at the same position of the wavefront. So it is possible to do that. It's very difficult, but it's possible. Yeah, sorry.
I think that you answered me, because if the time to take all the data is half hour, it's very long time to it this way. The question is to understand if it's possible to look inside where the defect or the other part that you showed, that you have analyzed, that you have discovered in the instrument, which is the moment that this kind of part have in the moment that when the violin was used. This is very important, because in this way we can understand the relationship also with the behavior, and also if the use or not is dangerous or not to use the violins. This is the question also that I think we talk about that here.
Okay. In fact, really playing would be difficult because you would kill the violinist, so it's a problem due to the X-ray dose. But what would be possible is to make a kind of robotic violinist, if you want. So you cannot really play because it's not fast enough. But we can make scans in about 10 minutes or even 5 minutes. It depends on the resolution you want. So it's possible to make different kind of tension and so on. You can even make something that would press on the strings. What is very difficult would be to recreate the sound itself. But maybe it's even not impossible. Honestly, I don't know if you make not an arc, but if you make a rolling system. So something that would be compatible with the tomography principle. So basically, it's possible to do probably plenty of things. After, what has to be discussed is it necessary to make a real measurement of these things, or is it not more efficient to make very high quality static scans and then to use a numerical clone? So you use a digital twin of the system, and you can do many things by analysis in silico. So at some point you have to keep in mind that using synchrotron X-rays to scan a violin, if you do that once from one time to the next one, it's not very dangerous because we use low dose system. But when you go with dynamic, it means that you are making hundreds of scans. So at the end, you are not anymore low dose. So at some point, you will create another issue that will be the accumulation of X-ray dose in the violin. We are not speaking about medical CT. We are speaking about synchrotron CT. So we are orders of magnitudes in terms of dose. Even if what we did for this violin in terms of synchrotron scan is low dose, so it is 100 times less than what we use for most of our experiments. At the end, if you do 100 times only 1/100th of the dose, you have the full dose. So it's that's just the thing. The dose is cumulative. So everything where you want to go in dynamic, where you need a lot of X-rays, I would say it should be done on modern instrument, or maybe not on a unique one for sure. It's always the thing. You have to make to take into account the dose.
Thank you. Right. I have you, but there is someone first.
Grazie. Buongiorno a tutti. Una domanda a voi grandi esperti, insomma. Io lo vedo dal punto di vista di violinismo, no? Questo strumento che è di là che sta dormendo, avendo avuto la fortuna di suonarlo, alla fine, detto in una maniera abbastanza semplice, perché ovviamente voi parlate di termini fantastici, cioè, però è molto complicato forse per noi violinisti capire questa cosa, perché lo strumento ha una sonorità particolare, bellissima, non perché è del comune, è appartenuto a Paganini, no, proprio il violino è unico nel suo genere, vuoi le condizioni che sono assolutamente tutte originali, insomma, praticamente il manico non è stato cambiato, catena praticamente non è stata cambiata, l'interno degli spessori non sono stati cambiati, parlando molto semplicemente, perché queste cose che avete fatto voi sono una cosa meravigliosa.
Never been changed. So when you play this instrument, which I did. Well, it has a very wide range of sounds. The quality of its sound is magic. And after playing that, you don't like any other violin anymore. We conducted an experiment with a tuning fork. The vibration lasts for 40 seconds. Have you discovered why there is such a broad refraction and why the quality of that sound is so special? Have you ever thought about that? No. The answer is no, we haven't. No, I must confess I have never had the opportunity to listen to the Cannone sound live. And so it's really a complex blend of different components and elements. Thank you very much for these absolutely interesting presentations. I'd like to reassure you all about the health status of our Cannone. We have talked about the strain a lot, but not about stress. Part of our investigation was focused on the viscoelastic component. Well, the result, which was perhaps not fully explained, was quite revealing because it showed us that the resilience of the instrument, that is to say, its capability to recover all its viscoelastic property, which means when it is loaded with less than 10% of the ultimate stress that can be withstood by the material. This means the following. Despite the load it is subjected to, the design of the box is so perfect that it can work at very low stress levels. So all the cracks that we've seen and also the insect groove and so on, well, they are worrying, but the sound comes out wonderfully nonetheless. And this is very important. But if you allow me, I'd like to point to something that is quite concerning. I think that we are neglecting the variability of wood when we wanted to extrapolate results that may be obtained from in-depth studies of the instrument. Some of the results that we have obtained may be explained in different ways, but do consider density. One of the special characteristics of that instrument is that its sound box has very large, very broad rings. There seems to be an adaptive dimension that is used by individual violin makers, and certainly also beyond the structure, there are some elements that cannot be controlled. The organization of microfibrillae is something that you cannot determine, and therefore perhaps you can study it. You can study it on the instrument, but unfortunately, we cannot extend that and perform that also on other components. And I think we need to be very careful about that. Yeah, that's a very good point. Each violin is an individual is one of a kind, and when you perform such a study, such an investigation, you've not studied the violin, but a violin. But you are saying that this violin works at less than 10% of its physical resistance to stress. Well, we have an indirect confirmation of that. I don't think it's a positive characteristic of this violin in particular, but of violins in general. The structure of violins is, however, very similar in different instruments. There is an indirect observation we have made. We are sure that wood can recover fully and entirely, and this has been demonstrated by the investigation on the Cannone, only when the material is loaded with stress levels below 10% of the maximum tensile strength, which is absolutely to be avoided, of course. Well, this indirectly tells us that since the wood of the violin recovers entirely the viscoelastic component of the deformation that takes place, that viscoelastic component is fully recovered. And therefore, the material is telling us that the violin is working at a low stress level. Well, this is really interesting. Usually we think that musical instruments are working or are played and are working close to their maximum tensile strength value. And so we consider this to be a high risk, a danger. Well, but they showed us the good results that confirm what we had already observed to a lower scale. So let's say that the greatest part of the load is applied on the neck, and the rest of the structure of the violin is subjected to a lower level of stress. Bruce, do you have any comment about the question that had to do with the sound or other aspects regarding that?
Su quello di Luca Fanfoni, anche qui, che parlava di...
Luca Fanfoni referred to the idea of sustainability. Perhaps this is an effect that is used by violin players when they are playing very swiftly on different strings in order really to obtain the sound they desire. Well, I always got the impression that this is due perhaps to the stiffness of the mounting, the different components that are used in order to set up an instrument for a given player. For an instrument whose structure is relatively feeble or weak, there is absorption without transmission of stress. So this takes some part of, takes away some part of the sound variations that are available for that instrument. On other instruments, that stiffness may be helpful. So perhaps this was not exactly an answer to your question, but Alberto, Pio, and I think in general that the bass band that is within the instrument is not the original component. It is the shape the shape also. We have seen other bass bars taken from other instruments that are slightly different in shape, and we have had this doubt for many years. We doubt it might have been replaced, but you said that you see no signs of glue penetration or no signs of other interventions, but when you replace or change a bass bar, I have to remove, of course, all traces of previous glue, and we should be able to understand whether the bass bar has been replaced or not. Well, I have a question there. But Paganini played with this bass bar, did he? Yeah, this is the bass bar that was used by Paganini. The instrument was used perhaps by the Mantegazza brothers around 1770, when they started to have longer necks and add slight changes or modifications to the instrument. And it is likely that Paganini had always been using that kind of setup since the very beginning, but it looks unlikely that this is the original bass bar. It is very different from the bass bar of other instruments. It maybe the same bass bar or a longer neck. Yeah, to remove, yeah, you also have to remove the old screws, and perhaps other changes might have been done in the late 18th century. Now, this is quite interesting. This was quite interesting. I hope we can continue this lunch. I'd like to thank you all, to thank the speakers and the audience, of course. I'd like to thank the translators and the translators. Thank you very much for your help. And this afternoon, we will resume at 2:30.